What's the feeling down in Puerto Rico since it is a territory of the United States? Would love to have it as a state of the United States. Of course, there's disagreeing factions in all different facets of here, there, everywhere. What's your take on the whole being a part of the United States or not, or carpetbaggers such as yourself showing up to enjoy the good life?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things that are unfair to Puerto Rico. Like, for example, the Jones Act is incredibly unfair to the people of Puerto Rico. The Jones Act is an act that is a lot deeper than what I'm going to describe, or actually, I won't even say what I'm going to describe, but what I even know. But one of the requirements of the Jones Act is anything that comes to Puerto Rico has to go to the mainland United States first. Any import. So, for example, if anything's imported from China, it's got to show up into, maybe California or Florida or New York before it actually can come down to Puerto Rico. And to me, you can only imagine the expense that passes on to Puerto Rican people. It's expensive. That's an expensive, way to live. When I was a kid and I lived in Puerto Rico, as a high school student, and I had a very different worldview, as we all do as high school students. I very much thought that Puerto Rico should want to become a state and should move towards statehood. In hindsight, I'm not sure that's the best thing for Puerto Rico either, because one great thing about Puerto Rico is they get a lot of the benefits of being American citizens without having to pay federal taxes. That doesn't mean that Puerto Rico doesn't pay its share to the United States. It absolutely does. Otherwise, why would the United States keep it? Everything's about money. I think Puerto Rico needs the US. I don't think it would benefit them at all to become a state. And here's why, is because one, health insurance, although healthcare is not like something that you'd be like, I'm flying to Puerto Rico for my healthcare. You would never say that. But health insurance here is significantly less expensive for the common person. And just by way of example, I am not Puerto Rican, a native Puerto Rican, but my health insurance costs went down like 2/3. Huge difference for a self-employed person. The other thing Puerto Rico has issues with, we don't know how to I say this with peace and love, peace and love. There's a lot of problems with government here. It's very corrupt. The police tend to be corrupt at times. So I don't think they should necessarily be fending for themselves. And a perfect example is, if you follow any kind of news, a former governor was just arrested by the FBI for corruption. When I was in high school on a military base, and so many of my classmates' parents were either FBI agents or CIA agents. They're everywhere around this island. And Puerto Rico gets, at that time, I haven't looked up the statistic recently, gets more federal funding than the state of Arkansas, by way of example. So I don't think it would behoove Puerto Rico to totally detach from the United States. I also don't know if it would really help them to become part of the United States as a full-fledged state, because they'd have to start paying federal taxes, and already the state taxes here are super high. They're very, very high. And not only are the state taxes super high, the sales tax here is very, very high. Life is not easy for a Puerto Rican in the traditional sense. And so for that, I feel for it, because they also follow federal laws. And when it comes to any federal minimums, that's what they go for. So for example, the federal minimum wage is, I think, $7.25 an hour. And that's what it is here, which to me is just insanity, being from California where the minimum wage is $15 an hour. I don't even know how somebody can survive. I mean,
I don't think anybody can. It doesn't seem like that's really the point anymore.
No, well, the thing is, I know it's not the point, but just for humanity's sake, I wouldn't pay a high school student $7.25 an hour, right?
And so should we dovetail that right into the discussion of the unemployment? Because you're right, but you complain that, people don't want jobs, and then complain about, you can't find people to hire. Mm-hmm. But if you don't offer a living wage, an attractive wage in the market, nobody's working for minimum wage, and nobody should at this point.
No. Well, what's your definition of minimum wage, right? Federal minimum wage, is that what we're talking about, or is California minimum wage?
Wage, anything less than a wage that you can in fact comfortably live in the area that you're working in.
Okay, so that's a great discussion point. So in other words, the minimum wage in California is $15 an hour, but it's probably not so comfortable to live off $15 an hour in most places in California. But I have to say that's kind of beside the point because, I lived in Temecula when I lived in California, and McDonald's employees got paid $17 to $18 an hour. So they weren't even getting paid. I don't think anybody who was getting paid minimum wage, to be honest with you, in recent history.
I think it's allowed to. And so some companies are still trying to offer minimum wage, where at the same time they're complaining that nobody wants to work and we don't want to pay. But I really think that ties in so much, especially when it comes to a risk of a recession, the risk that prices are going up at the same time that wages are going up, unemployment is down, and the GDP is going down. That's this horrible concept called stagflation.
Right. So here's the thing though, right? The one thing I like about the younger generation, there's a lot of things not to like about them, like, too sensitive, can't handle anything. All the things boomers probably said about us, I'll say about younger millennials and Gen Z, nothing's a joke. You can't joke about anything. Everything has to be politically correct. So those are my complaints. Get those out of the way. My compliments are, these are kids who know how to put up some real important boundaries and know how to look at things and life and figure things out that took me well into my 40s until I figured it out, right? Like work-life balance. I had no concept of boundaries. I would allow clients to call me on weekends at any time and text me and, just no boundaries whatsoever. No understanding of the word no in a professional sense, right? Never knowing to say, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not. That's not possible. Just really not understanding the concept of the word no. And I feel like that is one of the great things that is coming out of this younger generation, is that they're learning how to say no collectively. And I'm somebody who doesn't love the idea of unions, but I like the idea of protecting your sanity, protecting your space.
In my past perspective in life, agreed with you that I was not a fan of unions. My view of that has shifted about 180 degrees.
Really?
So I'd love to hear why you don't think that unions are beneficial to the people of America. I'll respond.
Yeah, no. So I've been a manager of a union. So I've been a manager outside of the union, right? So that's one place where I was. And then I was also in a union at one point. And neither time was what I would consider an enjoyable experience. Maybe they've shifted and changed since my time, but both times were in my 20s. So again, it's not recent experience, but the first experience where I was a manager and all of the employees were in the union and I wasn't, was, for example, I was a manager, like an assistant manager at the season ticket holders club and VIP club at the Fleet Center in Boston. It used to be called the Fleet Center in Boston. It's now TD Bank North Garden. I don't know what it's called anymore, but it's where the Celtics and the Bruins play, that place. And when I was working there as a manager and you're trying to get things done and you're trying to get the restaurant set up, or you're trying to get Kiss's dressing room ready for the concert they were about to, whatever you were working on that day. And you would say to say one of the waitresses or one of the staff, hey, can you help me move this table? Their answer would be, I don't move tables. You got to call the other union to get that table moved. I'm like, we're literally moving the tables 3 feet. Just tell me move the table. Or, blatant disregard for the rules and, policies, and breaking rules and policies, like asking celebrities for autographs, which was a big no-no, asking for pictures or taking pictures of celebrities, another big no-no, or players or whatever, or sneaking into dressing rooms or whatever. And that's a disciplinary matter, and no one would get disciplined for it. Or just giving terrible service, and no one would get disciplined for it because they're protected by the union. That was one reason I like it. I think unions can create a toxic work environment. The next time I was in the union, and in this regard, it wasn't that it was such a terrible, awful experience. I don't have any incredible terrible stories to tell you. What bothered me about the union is like I had to pay these dues that they got to choose what to do with those dues. I had to pay in to be part of a club I really didn't want to be a part of. Like I just want to show up and do my job and be done with it. I don't want to be part of your club and I certainly don't want to pay you dues. And then, I imagine some people who are in unions and feel the same way and feel even more enraged by it when they're paying dues for political action that they don't agree with. Nurses unions, teachers unions, things like that. So those are my two experiences. I think I'm not against unions per se, if you want to unionize, but those were my problems at the time with unions.
So I completely agree with you. And I think it's a horrible situation with the unions. Really, if somebody is not doing right, the extent that the union will defend somebody that's doing wrong, that's definitely an issue in the system. And where it really seems to be kind of the worst is in law enforcement.
Great point. Oh my God.
How a police can do so much wrong, do things that would literally put us in jail for years, and they shrug it off to qualified immunity. And if you want to do something, talk to my union rep.
Right.
And it's where it all goes to kind of die. And there's just no third party oversight of the police. But it's that's an overriding issue because it's not just the union, and in part the courts that rely on them, the prosecutors that don't want to upset the police, force that they rely on as well. So I think that there's a bigger issue there that union is a part of the problem, but there's kind of a problem overall. If you break a rule, you should be punished.
I think having somebody help represent you, somebody especially in law enforcement, it's no secret I'm no fan of the police. I don't, people say, well, who are you going to call if you're in trouble? I'm still going to call the police. I pay taxes. I'm still calling them. It doesn't mean I have to like them.
Very true. As long as you recognize their job is not to protect you either.
Yeah, so my contention, that's a great point about police unions. My brain didn't even necessarily go there. I was more thinking about the effect on the employer,
From the employer's perspective, unions are always bad. It adds additional costs, additional layers of requirements. It is not good from a business perspective. But I think us as a nation, we've gotten to such an extent that we do a lot to protect the employers, and the employers create the GDP. They're creating the money, the revenues, income, the wealth. I absolutely agree. As an employer, employers are important, but it kind of got so far off the taking care of the employers that a lot of the employees and all the working Americans got left behind. Yeah. And it got to such an extreme extent. Minimum wage, as an example, complaining that nobody wants to work. Maybe offer a little bit more wages, you don't have a problem.
Well, also accept responsibility where responsibility lies, right? Like, I'm just thinking about things like the service industry when, upper management says so-and-so called in sick, so you need to come in, or you're gonna no, I don't. That's not my responsibility. That's your responsibility as management to make sure that gets taken care of. How many jobs did I work where I didn't have any PTO whatsoever? And there's just always some kind of manipulation of people. That's what I think I don't like about the current corporate environment, is that there is a blatant manipulation of human beings. It just isn't human focused at all. I understand that corporations are supposed to be profit focused and not human focused, but come on, people, you can't.
Even that statement, though, I'm going to disagree with, because if they're being given the rights of a person and us as people, that's like saying that your only responsibility is to yourself and no one else around you.
Right.
Which maybe that is the case, but that's a really horrible way to live.
Right.
You can't have civilization that same way.
Right. No.
And if we're giving the corporations a pass to say, don't worry about the pain that you cause, don't worry about the climate change that you're causing, just focus on your profit. We're giving them an out that you and we don't have or shouldn't have if we do.
No, I agree. How many times does somebody look at you sideways because you used a plastic straw? I mean, depending on where you're in Texas, so probably nobody ever looks at you sideways for using plastic straw. But, plastic bags or plastic water bottles or anything, anything like that as an individual, or driving a Hummer, or driving, or flying a lot, or taking a cruise, all of these things are bad for the environment, right? But those actions by us little people are so minimal compared to what these corporations like, DuPont and other big corporations are, putting out in the environment. I want to say I was watching, there's a TikTok channel called, and I think it was on there, and I might have this wrong, but it was called Good Morning Bad News. And it said something to the effect that like 50% of the emissions in the air are caused by like 20 companies in the world. So like us as people can do very little to change climate change. All we can do is be aware of it.
Agreed. Then you take it one step further to, we just had the Inflation Reduction Act that had these climate change components to it. Like, all we're really talking about is if 20 companies were forced to, because it's the only way to cause change is to force them to actually pay attention to the things and to make changes. At the end of the day, that may be the only thing that saves it. At the same time, those 20 companies are the biggest companies of the world. They will also fight those regulations. And unfortunately, at least in our political system, the money is generally the power.
Yeah, and here, I just found an article while we were talking from The Guardian. Just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions. So what are you little person supposed to do about that? Not a lot. It's all like, feel guilty instead of, don't look over here, don't look behind the curtain, had the man behind the curtain to me. Wow, we went from...
But that's a big part of the entire, if you pay attention to the news, the marketing behind it, these climate change things, it's take personal responsibility, limit your own carbon footprint. You can do it. You can help. You. Reality is you can't do that much unless as a collective we cause those 100 companies to change what is really ruining the environment.
Well, yeah, and the other thing is not just companies, but countries. China alone produces 14% of the global emissions. China by itself. Now, are we contributing de facto to those global emissions? Probably, because we're buying from China. We're allowing them to manufacture in this very unsafe. We can't regulate their environmental policies, right? But what we can do is stop buying from them when they're not producing. I watched a documentary on Netflix actually about this very subject, about plastic and how so much of our plastic is not recyclable. So what we're doing is we are shipping it off to China and they're burning it. And it's not safe, and it's killing their people because we're shipping our plastic that's not burnable, and they're burning it because they don't care about anything.